All
Right,
right. Welcome to the Domestic
man.
Podcast. I'm Evan Bierman here with Dan Slowick, and Dan's already drinking on something. Dan, we got the NBA playoffs to talk about today, but why don't we start off with beers? What are you drinking?
I'm back on the non-alcoholic kick again. I was drinking some this weekend. So I have Athletic, which I think is one of the, most prominent non-alcoholic beers you can drink. This company is really kind of monopolizing like the non-alcoholic genre of beers. Just a little fact about them. In 2019, their sales were 2.5 million. A year later, it grew to 15 million. And I believe this past year, in 2024, or might be 2023, they're like top 5 sales in all of beer domestically. So that's with regular beer and non-alcoholic beer. So the non-alcoholic movement is spreading across the city. The way I consume it sometimes is like this. If I'm like just getting home or something, a non-alcoholic beer, I'll just do it then, or in between beers while I'm out, as like a pacer kind of thing. Or, if I just don't feel like drinking that night, I'll just do a non-alcoholic beer. But I believe they started out on the East Coast. They have a facility out here as well. They're from Connecticut, but they do have a facility here in San Diego as well. So they're very popular out here. A lot of advertising, billboards throughout the city. And I think they, are attracted to cities where there's a lot of, people constantly, worried about their appearance or, their physique and, self-conscious with their body image. And I feel like West Coast, San Diego, LA has a lot of that. So they're everywhere out here killing it. And their flavors are actually really good. I think that's my reason for I like it. It's probably the closest you can get to a beer tasting without actually having a beer. I have their Upside Dawn. It's their golden lager. Not too bad. I didn't look up what it gets on Untapped or anything, but I like it, man. What are you drinking?
Well, first I want to ask you, do you think the non-alcoholic movement's around to stay? Like, is this just a fad or is this something that you think is going to stick around?
No, I think so. And I think you keep seeing like stats as like the younger generations coming up. I think they're drinking less the alcohol than previous generations. And it's because of things like non-alcoholic beverages and, other vices that are available to them. So I think it's here to stay.
Okay, cool. So the beer that I'm drinking today is Prairie Path. It's from Two Brothers Brewing. They're out of Warrenville, Illinois. I've talked about Prairie Path on the show before, but I'll give you another quick rundown of it. It's a Belgian style golden ale, full flavored, slightly bitter. It's just a really good, easy drinking beer. I like to pick this one up when it's feeling like the summer, and it has been the last couple of days in the Chicagoland area. So I picked up some of these. A little bit about Two Brothers. They're an independently owned Illinois-based microbrewery founded by brothers Jim and Jason Ebel in 1996. Basically, they lived over in Europe for a while, wanted to bring back their knowledge of beer, brought it back to the Chicagoland area. They started the business using bulk milk tanks that they converted into fermenters that were donated to them by their grandfather, who was a retired dairy farmer. So that was a pretty interesting origin story for them. Fast forward to today, they have several awards, including a few gold medals from Great American Beer Festival, multiple locations throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. Some of them are, just beer. Some of them have food. And they also have one location out in Arizona now, too. They distribute in 13 different states. And they also have a successful coffee business, Two Brothers Coffee Roasters. They began that in 2012, started sales in 2013. And you can find them in Costco now. So I'm sure they're doing pretty well with their specialty grade coffee, but they're very eco and energy friendly, use a lot of practices that are green, renewable energy, things like that. So overall, I think it's a great company to support. I'm a really big fan of the Prairie Path. It's 5.1%. It's a 3.32, so not a great score on tap, but it's a good, easy drinking beer. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Dan, NBA playoffs, we got to talk about it. And here to help us out is Matt Consolazio. He is from the Indie Basketball, the podcast. Matt, thanks so much for joining us, and appreciate you coming on so we can talk some NBA.
For sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I'm going to turn the tables here for you and your podcast. I know you like to start off by asking your guests, what are you listening to?
Ooh, what am I listening to? It's funny being on the opposite end of this because now I'm like, when I'm spotlight's on me, I'm like, oh god,
Gotta be a good answer.
I I've been defaulting to a band called Freako, who's from Chicago. I've been really obsessed with that album. They're very like high energy. It's kind of like the Strokes a little bit, but maybe a little more erratic. What else am I listening to? Today I was listening to Sincere Engineer, who was actually a former guest on Half Court Sessions. She's awesome. She's very like Chicago punk. Yeah, those are a couple off the top of my head.
Awesome. Well, we'll get into Half Court Sessions for sure. But if you haven't heard of Indie Basketball, the podcast, it's official podcast of indie basketball where indie rock meets the NBA's best. So it's just a really interesting idea. I'm just curious where you came up with that and how long you've been doing it for.
Yeah, so this actually started probably at this point like 12 years ago. Because when I was in college, it just started with me and a bunch of friends just goofing around and just riffing off stupid puns of bands mashed up with NBA players. I think the first one we came up with was Sticker Rose, because obviously Derrick Rose was like huge.
Yeah.
And we just riffed off a bunch. So I started a Tumblr page that just did silly photoshops of bands with NBA players together, and I did that for a long time. Yeah, Bon Iverson was huge. And also LeBron Iver was also a variant of that one. Rilo Kyrie was another early one that was big. So started doing that on Tumblr, and it did it for a while. It got pretty popular on Tumblr. Kind of ran out of ideas, to be honest. And then once pandemic hit, I brought it back because I'm like, well, there's a lot of new players, there's a lot of new bands. So I brought it back on Instagram, and then I just like kept going. I started talking with bands that I like on Instagram and figured I'd start a podcast out of it. So I talk with musicians about basketball.
Yeah, and just looking at some of your guest lists, I see a lot of similarities maybe in some of the musical tastes that I would share with you. And I'm curious, maybe what were some of the formidable bands, maybe like when you're in high school, you going into the city to see them perform, or some of the venues that you're going to, and like just some of the bands that got you into the scene and some of the venues that you really enjoy visiting.
Yeah, I mean, like many people around my age, in high school, I was very into like emo jams.
Mm-hmm.
I was in an emo band called The Side Effects of Summer.
Love it.
But yeah, it was.
What
a lot
instrument did you play, by the way, on that? Got to go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I played bass and I played the occasional keyboard, despite not knowing how to play piano.
Yeah, rocking out on the keyboard.
You just, you find a couple notes and you stick with it. You figure it out. But bands that I was into at the time was like, everyone was into Fall Out Boy and stuff like that. I was really into Rise Against, who is also from the Chicagoland area. They're from Arlington Heights. And then, growing behind that, like I think the band that I had seen the most is a band called the Appleseed Cast. They're probably still one of my favorite bands. But yeah, it's, a lot of shows at places like the Beat Kitchen and Subterranean, and I wish I got to say I saw a lot of shows at like Fireside Bowl, but they kind of stopped doing those awesome shows there.
Yeah,
by the time I was going to concerts, Metro, lots of shows at the Metro.
Yeah, Knights of Columbus, throw it out there.
Oh yeah, there you go. Knights of Columbus was a great suburban.
That was my first concert I saw. The Academy is to play there when I was like 12. My brother took me.
Maybe back when they were just the Academy.
Yeah, right. Just no is. Do you have I saw too, you just recently had PD on, somebody who's got a lot of fame on TikTok and Instagram as well. And I really enjoy his music. Do you have a favorite guest so far that you've been able to have on your show and get to know?
PD was really cool to talk to for sure. That felt like kind of like a different echelon of guests just because of his popularity on TikTok. The aforementioned Academy is. I had Adam Siska, who played bass in that band.
You guys talk shop really on cool bass playing?
Totally, yeah. It was really cool talking with the drummer from Japanese Breakfast, Craig. that was like kind of like the first guest I had on that I was like really getting guests that I admire. And it was a really cool moment to do that.
So tell us about half court sessions. You know, you mentioned it off the top. Still some bands that you're listening to there. Just tell us about that, because I'm really curious how that started and how that's progressed since it began.
For sure. Yeah. Half court sessions basically, you know, in a nutshell is kind of like Tiny Desk or like, you know, the Logotech takeaway shows, but they're all on basketball courts. Mostly outdoor because those are easier to get permission to shoot on, aka you don't get permission.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was actually an idea that was just riffing with someone in my Discord channel who was a videographer. His name's Mike, and we had this idea to do it, and just I think it was probably 2 summers ago now. We just started reaching out to guests who would be interested in doing it, and yeah, because he's a videographer, he was able to get the equipment, and we just kind of started doing them. The first summer we did, I think, 5 of them, and it's been pretty awesome. Like that's my favorite thing to do with this whole thing.
And I know for Evan and I, it's kind of just a 2-person show where, you know, we're wearing every single hat and booking our guests on here. Is that the same thing for you? Are you out there kind of just like, are you sliding into people's DMs, looking up their emails and just kind of like throwing it out there? Or are you, you know, how are you corralling these guests to come on?
There's a lot of DMs for sure.
Yeah. Hear that.
It was definitely that. And, you know, the more I do this, the more I am getting I'm getting more bites through emails and through like reaching out to their PR folks, because that's seems to be a very fruitful way to kind of talk, because they obviously want stuff to promote. But yeah, it's a lot of shooting my shot in DMs.
But it's surprising how many people are receptive to do it, right? I mean, I feel like the success rate is probably pretty high. I'll speak a little bit to that, but Dan's the one that handles most of that. 95% of that, I would say, but it seems like everyone's really receptive to it, which has been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it started with noticing people follow me who like are in bands, and I'm like, I recognize the names, and I'll, you know, people who are already fans of it, it's like an easier sell, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have like a pie in the sky kind of guest that you would love to have on, a Mount Rushmore, so to speak, of
oh man,
you know, people that you'd really love to have, people, maybe somebody that you've been shooting your shot at for a while? And
I mean, Justin Vernon is like the biggest notable basketball head.
Boney Bear.
Yeah. For the guest, it would be him probably. For half court sessions, I would love to do Jeff Tweedy from Wilco. Like Jeff Tweedy from Wilco at the United Center. Like somehow, I don't know, but
put it out there.
Dream.
That'd be awesome to get that to happen. I just like the uniqueness too of the concept, and I think it works really well in Chicago because it's such a sports city, but also has such a really good music scene as well, and history there, and a lot of bands that come out and are successful. So just meshing them together and finding that common ground, because it's always like athletes want to be musicians and musicians want to be athletes. So. I mean, there's plenty of avenues that you can talk and go down there. Has any of the people that you've talked about are like legit basketball players? Like could have had somewhat of a profession or career down that way, or maybe played at higher levels?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't played with them obviously, but I know that Ellis and Alan from the band San Fermin, they both played pretty competitively, and Alan was even on NYU's basketball team. He was pretty I mean, they're both pretty good. I know they back in their day they could play. And actually Shiraz from the band Deeper, he can play as well. I've heard many stories about him being good. That is one thing I've always dreamt of doing, is doing like a musicians tournament.
I was going to think like there should be like a musician runs like court open during like the festivals. You Pitchfork or a Lala, you rent out a court and like, all right, who wants to go play pickup with indie basketball?
Dude, I've
talk to
been
him in
pitching it,
between.
man. I legit have been pitching it to Riot Fest for 2 years in a row.
Yeah, that'd be get Guar out there playing.
Because I could fill an entire tournament of people who have been on the podcast who I know would be down to do it.
Dude, that'd be sick. Merch would be sick. Sell some indie
Yeah.
basketball merch.
Yeah.
From when you started out, how has the podcast grown, changed, evolved, and then like we've talked about things that you want to do with future things as well. But is there anything else that you have kind of on your bulletin board as a goal?
I mean, the growth, I guess, it was I feel like all things, it was slow at first, and then you get like a big wave. And that started with like when I was just posting memes and stuff. Once I started the podcast, it's just like certain artists will give me a big bump because of their popularity or their fan base. I feel like in terms of followers and I've plateaued a little bit, but that happens, and something else will come along that'll give it another bump. But
Right.
that's just kind of what happens. It ebbs and flows. And in terms of things I want to do in the future, I mentioned that tournament is definitely something that would be sick, but I want to do this more consistently. Basically, I'd love to quit my day job and do this all the time.
Yeah.
Be the dream.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the NBA, current state, the playoffs? You got any predictions? Any surprise teams? Because I feel like, all I've heard lately is that this is the most parity the NBA's had in a long time. And so it's really like anyone's, tournament. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are if you got a team that you think is going to go a long way.
The Bulls.
Yeah. I mean,
You can't say the Bulls.
no, I can't.
You're gonna lose all your
will
credibility
not
if you say the
say
Bulls.
The Bulls are kind of a bummer, even though they are like okay.
The best way to
It's the
describe
worst
them.
spot to be.
Yeah.
They're a
Yeah,
bummer,
right.
but they're okay.
I mean, the East in general is kind of whack all around, unless you're Boston.
Boston, yeah.
So I think to say anyone but Boston is making the finals is kind of a mistake. So it's got to be Boston. But in the West, it could go a lot of different ways. I like the Thunder, but they're pretty young.
Too young. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Knicks?
But,
You think the Knicks no shot?
The Knicks are interesting. I'd say outside of Boston, maybe they have the best chance just because Brunson is kind of unbelievable. But you never know. Like the sixth, Embiid is healthy. Maybe the Sixers make a run.
Yeah, it's gonna be Boston, Denver again.
That's the boring pick, but I think that's the real pick.
Yeah, I mean it is weird this year how no one's. I feel like Denver's always forgotten about because they're just out there in the West and they're just press play and they're just winning 60 games easy. Do you like this new format with the play-in, where like teams like the Bulls kind of have a chance to play some meaningful basketball at the end of the year and possibly make a run and upset some teams?
I'm coming around to it. I'm very anti in-season tournament.
Yeah, that was terrible this year. Even the players didn't even know what was happening.
Yeah, I think people
I don't understand the point of that. Yeah,
the first game they thought it was like, oh, okay, I kind of get it, but the way they scheduled it and like the courts were kind of atrocious, and it's just like you can't recreate playoff atmosphere in like the first month of the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
I'm excited though. I like the play-ins. I mean, I'm looking forward to the games tonight. If you're just like an NBA junkie and a hoops head, you're like, all right, cool. We got meaningful playoff basketball. Anything could happen. The players are going to play harder. I think the last couple of weeks too, the refs really kind of were swallowing the whistle a little bit and kind of getting players ready for playoffs. So NBA playoff basketball is definitely a way different product than the regular season. And I think people are excited to see those games and that level of entertainment back, because the regular season's just so boring sometimes.
Sure. I mean, MLB has the wild card. So like it is a very similar format, and like, give those, maybe you get that Cinderella story. Maybe the Bulls can do
Bulls
it.
could be it. Yeah, they be it this year. Kobe White gonna put the league on notice.
Maybe Kobe White gets that most improved player. That's what I'm pulling for.
I don't think so. I think they said it's a lock that it's Maxey, right?
I know it's kind of.
Weren't the odds something like if you bet like $100 for him to win it, you would win like no money? or something like
that. He was already good last year.
Yeah.
So okay, the Bulls are going to lose, and then what's going to happen with this team? Are there going to be any meaningful changes, or what do you suspect is going to happen here?
I mean, I doubt it.
Yeah.
I've been saying for like 2 years already that they should tear it down. But like, why would you do it? I mean, this upcoming draft is just pretty awful. So like, they should have done it for Wembanyama. But yeah, I mean, I think they should, get rid of. You got to get rid of DeRozan. You got to get rid of Levine. Vooch, good luck getting rid of him. But
Yeah, just extended him.
Yeah.
Lonzo,
but I mean, just let Kobe cook.
Lonzo might play next year.
Yeah, we'll see about that. I'll believe it when I see it.
Is there anyone in the NBA? I can't think of off the top of my head, but maybe you've done more research. Anybody in the NBA who is like an indie rock fan that is that I wouldn't notice or think of that, listens to some of that kind of music?
So there's two people that maybe you wouldn't expect that I had seen things about, and one is Josh Richardson.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So there was like a thing on Twitter a while back of him just kind of like asking for recommendations, and he was saying that he likes like Interpol and like Fantagram and like all these bands. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
cool.
And then the other, I've seen Jeremy Sohan posting, and he'll post songs he's listening to, and he's putting on Mac DeMarco and stuff like that. So
I can see that.
Yeah,
he's got some style to him too. I think he dyed his hair a little bit.
Right, the kind of chill beach house vibes, I think, is what he goes for. And then as far as like maybe more expected, Matt Bonner is very into indie
Red Rocket, baby. Yeah. Jimmy Butler was just in Fall Out Boy's music video, wasn't he?
He was, and there was my whole Discord was freaking out that one day when he was like posting Instagram stories of like he posted like Hot Mulligan in there, and everyone's like, "Oh my god!"
Straightened his hair out.
Yeah,
it took his pictures for the year like that.
Pretty funny. We love emo Jimmy.
So you've referenced the Discord a couple times. I'm curious when did that start, and how has that helped with the podcast with guests or ideas or a generation, anything like that?
Yeah, that was probably.
So we don't have a Discord, Dan. Maybe we need to get a Discord.
Got a good Discord.
It was probably over 2 years ago, but it's mostly because when you find people who like this intersection like this, people go pretty crazy for it. So I started that. We got, I think we're approaching like 200 people in there right now, which is really cool. But it's honestly one of the most like supportive like group of people I've ever like been a part of. Like, I'm like, no joke, they're all super nice people. I have become real life friends with several of them, including the aforementioned Mike, who like shoots a lot of my half court sessions. I've met up with a ton of people, and there's a lot of cool musicians in there who like are in like smaller bands that people don't know about that I like to help promote. When every month we have a Patreon playlist that I'll kind of put some stuff on that people might not know about, which is cool.
Nice.
Yeah, just building community, right? And people finding what they're into and just giving them that outlet to connect. It's wild once you start creating something and like people start being receptive to it, right? And you're like, oh, there's a place for this and people are enjoying it.
Totally.
Who would have thought?
It's also like, more recently, it's been a really surreal moment to have, I had on some people like Tom from Ducks Limited, and I've had PR folks reach out to me about getting bands on the podcast, which is cool. And like Tom was like, I told my management that when we put this album out, we got to get on the Indie Basketball podcast. I'm like, dude, that's really cool to hear.
That is cool. Do you have we'll get a couple more questions and get you out of here. Do you have any people on the schedule coming up that you're excited about or that you could tell us that you're having on?
I'm starting to do a couple more things like this where I'm talking with other podcasts, which is like really nice to kind of just exchange like that. It doesn't always have to be, musicians on. So I like kind of getting on that level, and scheduled musicians potentially. I have a list of people that I know would be interested. I just haven't got it scheduled yet, but John from the band Young Jesus is scheduled, and they're pretty cool. So that's one I have scheduled for sure. Kevin Devine, possibly.
Went to high school with the Kevin Devine. I'm sure it's not the same one.
But yeah, that's a couple. You know, I have definitely some dreams. Stephen Malcolmus is a dream. Again, like I mentioned, Bon Iver, but Steve Malcolmus from Pavement. I know he's into basketball.
And how often are you putting out episodes?
I'm trying to be more consistent. I'm trying to keep it weekly. But sometimes it's just
it's
like
the toughest thing, right?
Yeah. Scheduling is very tough, and people back out or things like that. Like I previously did to you. And it happens.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
For sure, man. Well, we appreciate it. We really appreciate you coming on too and sharing how your podcast has started, how it's grown, and just getting the word out too. It's just really, really nice to hear from somebody else in the podcast community too. So again, follow Indie Basketball, the podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you can.
Yeah, all the podcast is on all the streaming stuff, but I'm pretty active on Instagram with all the silly memes and all that.
What's the handle?
Do
a little plug here. Indie Basketball. Okay.
Indie Basketball.
You got a website too, right?
Yep, indiebasketball.com. I feel like we do have some, you actually mentioned merch. We do have some merch. We got Bon Iverson on a hat, and one of my favorite. Sometimes I'll manipulate album artwork, and it's the cover of "Lift Your Skinny Fist" by Godspeed You Black Emperor, but he's holding a basketball.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's awesome.
Had Death Cab for Curry sweatshirts a while back, but they're also
Matt, anything else you want to tell the listeners that they should go visit your Patreon, or where can they find all your stuff at?
Yeah, I mean, Patreon's sick because trying to do that is, like I said, so I can afford to do more half-court sessions and all that stuff. So that's patreon.com/indiebasketball. But other than that, just come through, check us out, and join the Discord and join some like-minded folk, and it's a fun time.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. He is Matt Consolazio with the Indie Basketball Podcast. Matt, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. Good to talk with some Chicago area folks.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. And that's been our show. Thanks again to our guest, Matt Consolazio. Again, check out Indie Basketball at Indie Basketball on Instagram, indiebasketball.com. Thanks to Matt for joining us today. For Dan Slowick, I'm Evan Bierman. You've been listening to the Domestic Draft Podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate the show. You can find us on Twitter at Domestic Draft, on Instagram at Domestic Draft Podcast. Our website is domesticdraft.com. And you can watch the show on YouTube. Just search up Domestic Draft and drop us a sub. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.